Sweet. Cool. When you guys are doing work, when you guys are doing preparation, I want you to understand over memorize. Because once you understand something, you know it for life, right? You don't have to keep reminding yourself what the formula and stuff is. When you memorize this, you can forget it. And when you forget it, it's difficult to re-remember, right? This is where people get those study habits, maybe like, Pomodoro or spaced repetition or active recall. Okay, and people get really, really, really good at doing these memory games, but then they're missing this. They're missing the understand aspect of it. And this is what I want you to learn, right? In mathematics, in science, in physics, in chemistry, everything, a lot of people just do this, right? I don't like this. Don't do this ever, right? I never teach my students to do this because this means that you have to put substantially more work. It means you need to put in more work, right? You need to learn the most optimal ways to memorize. You need to learn the most optimal ways to study. Whereas if you do this, if you understand something, you can derive the logic yourself and you don't need to keep memorizing, right? Because once you understand the logic, you can derive it for yourself. And when you do that, it becomes so much easier to learn things. It might be more work initially, but it becomes less work over a period of time because this requires more work all the way. More work all the way. When you understand something, it's creating these networks in your brain that allow you to actually store the information more effectively than just rote memorization, right? Because this is all rote memorization. You don't understand exactly where the logic comes from. You don't understand the connections between things. It requires so much work to create these connections, which is why a lot of the tutoring companies and a lot of the teaching agencies and stuff that you see, they do this. They teach you how to memorize. They force you to memorize, and then they create these problems in memorization, which is gaps in logic, which is in this day and age, everyone is distracted. It's very, very difficult to set time aside to memorize things. So all these tutoring companies, they force you to memorize things. Right? They force you to memorize things. And then when these create problems later on, they then give you a band-aid solution and they tell you, oh, it's because you're not doing this. But in my course, that's $70 or whatever. I'll teach you how to solve the problem, right? I'll teach you the band-aid fix for this. And it's usually all just the same garbage. It's all the same fluff, right? It's Pomodoro, it's spaced repetition, it's active recall, or some kind of methods for that, right? I've seen someone do mind maps and things like that. Mind maps and connections all come back to this, right? It's deriving the logic for yourself. It's making connections. So I never want you to memorize something. That sucks, right? Memorizing things suck. It takes so much time. Forget about this, right? Forget about the memorization part of things. Okay? Learn how to understand something, derive logic for yourself, make the connections between things, and then play around with ideas. Because when you play around with ideas, when you make the connections, when you derive logic yourself, you inadvertently understand it, and it's creating the exact same neural links that get stored in your long-term memory, which is what all that active recall, Pomodoro, spaced repetition, that's what all of that is doing, right? It's creating those neural links. This does it more organically and it's more fun. The only downside of this process is the fact that it takes more time initially. That's the only downside of this entire process. It takes more time initially. But once you pass this hurdle, you take less time overall to do things, right? It requires less consistency. It requires less effort later. And it means that you're free to do all the other things that you need to do, right? You can do your sport, you can play your video games, you can read your books or whatever you want to do. Not that I'm a fan of really playing video games, but I see the appeal, right? But yeah, it once you understand something, it makes it more fun, but it does take more time initially, okay? It does take more time initially because you have to do the research. You have to put in the effort initially to start with, but overall, you'll understand things a whole lot better. Okay. Let me give you an example, like a real life story. So I'm sure you know what a circle is. Okay, that's a pretty good circle. I don't know if you can see it on camera, but I'll like highlight it in a little bit more, right? So let me do that. Right, there we go. We have a circle. Okay, kind of a lopsided circle. So a circle, when I was younger, right, I could never remember what number the interior angles inside my circle were. Okay, I could never remember at all. So the number is, this is, 360 degrees or whatever it was. right? So I had to memorize this, right? I had to memorize the fact it was 360 degrees. I had a really bad memory when I was a kid, and I still kind of do, to be fair. So I could never remember this. I could never remember the fact that it was 360 degrees. So what I did was I Googled reasons why a circle is 360 degrees. Okay, why is that such a specific number? Wouldn't it have been easier to say, I don't know, 400? Because when it was 400, okay, you can divvy it up into four and stuff really nicely, and then you can, do everything else, right? When it's 360, right, it's no longer 100 degrees on each side, it's 90 degrees on each side. So I didn't know why they did that, right? Wouldn't it be easier to say that it was 100 degrees overall, and then it's nice, clean, easy numbers to work with? And so I always questioned why that was the case. I never understood it. Okay, so I did a lot of research, and I read a lot of books and stuff on it, because it was fascinating to me at the time. And what I found the reason they defined it as 360 degrees. I'm covering the entire thing. I'll do it here, right? The reason they defined it as 360 degrees is, one, because it has so many factors, right? It has so many divisors. Okay, and so on and so forth. You can keep going, right? It has so many divisors. So back in the olden days, right, it was so much easier to do the mathematics with so many divisors. And so that was one of the reasons why they liked it. But then it still left me the question, like, oh, why didn't they use like 400 or 100 or something like that? That was one reason. The other reason was that when the Babylonians were making their mathematics, right, they used circles to describe astronomy. And so they recognized back in the day that the Earth went around 360.25 or whatever the number is. And so they approximated 365, which is the orbit of the Earth around the sun, to 360 because it was easier to calculate. And so they recognized that the Earth went around orbital patterns, or the sun went around orbital patterns, because I assumed that back in the day, I don't actually remember, but I assumed that they didn't think of the heliocentric universe. They thought of the geocentric universe, which is when Earth is the center of everything. But they saw 365 and they went, oh, it's close enough to 360. That made sense to me because I know how many days there are in a year. I know that the Earth goes around in a circle. So I go, okay, well, circle is 365 and 360 is much easier to work with mathematically. And so historically, that's why we kept 360 degrees. When I understood why 360 was the way it was, when I understood why 360 degrees was in a circle, it made it so much easier for me to memorize things, right? Or not memorize, but understand what it was, right? And I never forgot why a circle was 360 degrees. So it all comes back down into this. It always comes back down into why. So that is all I really want to talk about in today's video. Keep asking why whenever you're doing things in math or in science or in any type of subject that you're studying. Always ask why and understand it to a thorough enough level that you can teach to someone else. And if they pester you why, you know exactly what to do and how to do it. Because then this allows you to understand and to keep doing things. So always understand why things are the way they are and make sure you understand the fundamental and the foundation behind it. And if you don't, keep questioning until it arrives at it, right? Yes, there are some things in life where you can't do that. For example, why is 1 + 1 equal to 2? It's very difficult to understand that at a fundamental level, and you have to go into really high levels of mathematics to probably prove it. Accepting those definitions, then building from there are one of the best things you can do, right? So until you go into really high levels of math where you can understand those complexities, which I haven't reached yet personally, and I don't think I ever will because it sounds ridiculous, then you have to build from a basis, okay? And this is the basis that you build off of. So I hope that video helped. A lot of people who struggle with memorizing things also tend to struggle with problem solving. There's another video on problem solving that I'll put out, and it's probably on screen at this point. So if you want to check that out, you can. Hope that helped. Don't like, don't comment, don't sub. That'll be it for today. See ya.